Hi, my name's Mario Morris and I'm at Coed's Rural Art Space here in South Wales. And today I'm going to be following Steve Watts around with a focus on permaculture, alternative living and a few thoughts of the way ahead when it comes down to growing food. Well, hi there. I'm here with Stephen Watts and Stephen is a... Probably best ask him what his passion's all about. Stephen.
I'm a multidisciplinary. I have a lot of interests. One of my main kind of core interests is plants and growing plants, primarily edible plants and medicinal plants.
Cool. So, the term grower?
Yes. I'm a grower as opposed to a gardener, really, because we associate gardens with Gardener's World and growing flowers and stuff like that. And I generally focus on edibles and medicinals as the kind of core practice of me as a grower.
So, in that sense, how big of a scale would you say your operation is when it comes down to growing?
My kind of core practice as a grower, as much as I'm kind of like wanting to feed myself, I'm an educator, and so I'm not pushing to be a market producer, meaning like growing enough to sell and earn a living. I'm growing enough to feed myself and my close friends and maybe my family as well, although my family are up in Sheffield. But it's a small scale growing is what I'm talking about. It's people who've done allotments, it's people who've got back gardens, it's people who've got small holdings. I'm not doing a market garden scale, although the techniques and the principles are very similar and they cross over. There are differences in the approach. I'm keeping it on a small scale so that the free time that I have from not being 100% on it, I can do other things and I can educate people about how to grow their own. So I'm growing for myself right now in this time, it fluctuates, but right now I'm probably growing about 50% of my food, 2 meals a day are straight from the garden, 1 to 2 meals a day are completely garden food. And that's even at this time of year, at the end of the hungry gap before the crops start again. And then there's times of the year in August, September, October, in the abundant months, when I'm eating 80-90% from the garden.
No.
And that's a predominant plant-based diet, but I'm not vegan. I do use animal foods. I don't take on the responsibility of animals myself at this stage because I want to keep flexible and a little bit less committed than doing animal husbandry would require.
What would you say, if I was to ask, what's an average day? Do you have an average day? What's an average day? I mean, what kind of hours do you put into it? What time do you start?
Well, from the months of November through till April, I might be doing 1 or 2 hours a day in the garden, as opposed to the summer where I might be doing 14 to 16 hours a day from dawn till dusk. I have to usually have a day a week rest because it is physical. Also, the hours vary. If it's really hot, I work more early in the morning and more late in the evening. I don't work in the middle of the day if it's really hot. But if it's cool, I won't work in the morning and I won't work in the evening, and I'll work at the hottest time of the day. So in the winter, I'll be out 11 till 2, and in the summer, I'll be out 7 till 11, and then 4 or 5 till 9 kind of thing. Or even 10, sometimes I'll be up, So but you can see the variation. I'm very much adapting to the conditions, which is why it differs from a standard job where you go 9 to 5. But if you were to span it out over the whole year, you'd probably end up with the same amount of hours,
You can pick a better location than the one you're right in now. Talking about going out, literally don't have to go far, where we literally have your garden right here on your doorstep. Tell us about your garden.
We're in the veg garden now, and this is where we've got like 3 main vegetable beds here, which have been built as raised beds, slightly raised, paths wood chipped, and this is part of a wider system around the space where we've got other veg beds, in that we're rotating the vegetables from one bed to another. This is our pea bed right now, so we've put up hazel sticks with string. You can see the peas coming up. The peas are starting to climb on to the lower layers of the string. There's probably about 4 or 5 different types of pea here. And then in this bed here, we've cleared the ground to put lettuces in the next few days.
Lettuce
is going to go there. We've got parsnips coming up here in the rows. We had difficulty germinating them this year because of the lack of rain, so we've been having to water the beds for the seeds to come up. You can see there's a row of carrots here, and the carrots are looking okay from a sowing probably about a month ago. We've got other rows of carrots coming up, and as they arrive, as they pop out of the ground, we're going to be weeding them. And then further down we've got some turnips in these rows, we've got some fennel, we've probably got other types of root veg going on down there like salsify and things like that. And then there's lettuce that's actually amazingly survived the winter. So this is regrowth from what was sown probably in September last year. So we just left it in. There's a bit of self-sown buckwheat there. We grow buckwheat as a green manure. And this one here is called skirret, and skirret is a root vegetable that's perennial, and it's got like these fingery-like roots that taste a bit like parsnip. They're very sweet. And we'll have a quick look at this bed.
It's hard to appreciate in some ways for a person who's unexperienced that all this earth right here, to me, this looks like earth, but yet there's all this vitality and growth that's happening directly underneath the surface.
Yeah. It's been, you know, creating a veg garden takes many, many years.
Yeah.
It doesn't just happen overnight unless you've inherited the veg garden. You know, this was just part of a field at one point. This veg garden is 20 years in the making now.
Wow.
So it's taken 20 years for it to evolve into where it is now. It hasn't happened overnight, you know, and that's okay. You know, the soil takes a long time to improve. You're having to bring in tons of organic matter. You're having to dig out rocks, bindweed, nettles, couch grass, docks. You have to completely clear the ground, and then you have to improve the fertility of the soil as well. And you might have to build raised beds. You might have to put up some shelter from the wind. There's all sorts of reasons why it takes time to get you to that stage. And once you've got it to that stage, then you need to maintain it. But it should be that you can get to a place where you're putting in less effort than what it's actually giving you in terms of food. That's the kind of aim. Then you kind of have a guide to your, you know, self-sufficiency. So if it only takes you a day to weed the veg garden, and it's 1 day a week, or even 1 day a month if you've got it really set up, then you know, if you've got it like really well set up, you can be digging up potatoes and pulling out carrots and pulling out beetroot with what seems like just, you know, a few days of work a year. A few interesting things in the veg garden. So this is a perennial kale. You can see it looks like a kale, but it doesn't have any flowers on. Most of the kales at this time of year are flowering. So this one is green all year round, and you grow it through cuttings. So you literally snap off a bit like this, and you just pop that in a pot. You take off this big leaf, you stick that in a pot, that starts to grow, and then you've got a new kale plant.
Wow.
And you can just eat these leaves. You take out the stem bit there, chop it up with a sharp knife to, you know, cut through the fibres of it, and steam it or fry it or put it in a soup.
Wow.
And so there's a food for you very instantly.
And I've sampled your cooking and it's good.
Yeah. We've got garlic, which was sown. This was sown a little bit late, probably in February, but not too late. And that'll give us bulbs in midsummer or a bit later, maybe July. We've got a bed here of mustard. This was just a broadcast sowing of mustard in March, and this is just to get a crop of salad leaf. So we can pick the leaves of this, stick it in salad, or we can cook the mustard leaf, and it's very nutritious. Mustard leaf is generally a little bit more nutritious than lettuce. It's got a bit more oomph to it, you know. And it's very tasty. We've got onions here, and you'll notice that this is like, it looks like plastic that we've planted them through, but this is not plastic. This is a biodegradable mulch mat. It's made out of cornstarch. So this will rot after 1 year. And this is a technique that market gardeners are practicing. It's a way of, particularly good for onions, for leeks, and for garlic, as well as brassicas and salads. What it means is that, you know, we've got a few lettuces here, for example. It means that we'll never have to weed them. You know, that's the advantage of this system. It does cost a little bit. It's about, I think it's about £5 per square metre of this stuff. But if you think to yourself, you know, it's going to take me an hour to weed a little patch, and I'm going to have to do that every week, then that's going to maybe save you a bit of time, you know. So these are techniques, if time is precious and you have the money, you can buy that, plant through the matting. There's a technique to putting it down, but it's not that difficult. You have to bury the edges of it, lay it so it's very flat. But you can see the onions have no weeds growing in between there, and we literally just come back and harvest them now. Once it's planted, come back and harvest. This here is rocket, and rocket's a plant I would very much recommend for beginners to grow, because the slugs generally leave rocket alone. They don't really eat rocket. It's very expensive in the shops, and it's so easy to grow. You can grow it pretty much all year round. There's not 1 month of the year when you can't be eating rocket. It's very easy to save seed from. The seed won't cross with other types of vegetable seeds, so it will always remain true to seed. So once you've got rocket seed, you can just throw it back in the ground, let it grow, let it go to seed, save the seed, throw it back in the ground, and you can do that almost all year round. So this one will be a little salad crop, which is going to be replaced by leeks. So once we've taken the rocket out, which will be in about 1 month, maybe less, we're going to eat it as like baby rocket, like little leaves like this, you see. We just put that in a salad. There's a little bit of holes in the leaf. That's a thing called flea beetle. Flea beetle will eat the leaves, but it doesn't affect the flavour or the nutritional value or the health of the crop. So it's totally fine to eat it. It's just a cosmetic thing. You won't see it in the shops because most of the rocket from shops is grown in polytunnels, which avoid the flea beetle. But we're just growing it outside and it's fine. We've got more onions here. This is onions that aren't growing through the matting. So we like to experiment. We do it in different ways, and you can see the weeds coming up in between the onions. So we need to go and weed this, which will be like a little, half an hour job once a week kind of thing. We can see also over there in the corner of the pea bed, there's the celery coming up from last year. So if we come around here. Usually in the UK, we're down in South Wales here, so we're by the coasts and we don't get heavy frosts. So this is celery, and this is regrown from last year. We were eating it from probably June, July, maybe not June, July, August, September, October, November, and then it starts to die off because of the cold weather. And then if it manages to survive the winter, you get to pick it again. And the parts that we're picking is the stems here. So this is like, you can see the leaf bit there looks familiar. That's like a bit of the stem. But this bit here is the circular part of the plant that's starting to want to produce flowers. And the flowers will come out at the top there. You can see they're just starting there. That's the flowers of the celery. But other than the leaf, which is very strong and generally quite bitter, which you can only eat in small amounts, the rest of all of that is edible, and we can just chop that up, put it in a soup traditionally, or you can put it in a salad or whatever, so that's nice to have that regrowing.
Been talking about the community, and here we have a couple of folks over there. Lady V, what are you up to, Veronica?
I'm planting in these little calendula plants and potting them out, and they'll turn into these beautiful orange flowers.
So literally working the island that Steve was referring to.
Yeah,
and Matt too?
Yeah, same
Oh,
here.
Same here.
Planting calendula flowers to make calendula oil later on. Then we get the flower heads and then you dry them and you infuse them, cold infusion in olive oil or whatever oil you want, and then it soothes the burning wounds and stuff.
I've experienced it firsthand.
Yeah,
Beautiful
you
stuff.
get some, huh?
The bottle you gifted us.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, no, it's very good stuff. The soil is very dry though.
Alright, we're just going to have a look at the tunnels now. So yeah, this is one of the polytunnels here at Coed, and we've got some things from last year, which in this case here it's a type of mustard leaf. It's the cut-leaf mustard, sometimes called purple frills or red frills or Mizuna, I believe. And this one you can see that the flowers are on it, but there's also the seed pods are starting to develop, you see. In these seed pods will be the seeds in about 1 month, and we are saving seeds so that we can plant the lettuces or the salads of this crop for next winter, which we'll sow in about September or October. We like saving seeds, you know, it's good. And all the tall stuff in this whole tunnel is all for seeds. So this is Greek cress, it's a spicy salad leaf, and it's got about 3 weeks before it goes to seed. Here is parsley seed. We're going to save our own parsley seed off that. There's another parsley plant next to it. And all these things that we're saving seeds from are very easy to save seeds from. They don't cross with other things. So if you just let the plant go to seed, keep it watered, and when the seed is ready, pull it off, dry the seed properly, put it in a paper bag, and store it properly out of direct sunlight, in a box, away from the rats, the mice, in a cool environment, dry environment. That seed will live for anything between 1 to 10 years, depending upon what type of crop it is. So in this tunnel, as a quick overview, we've got the mustard, the cress, the parsley, Portuguese cabbage here with the big yellow flowers. We've got this little one in the corner here. This one's called Claytonia. That's another winter salad. This is all winter salads. We've got more type of kale here that we're going to leave to go to seed. This is a late flowering variety, which I'm quite curious about. We've got a bit of coriander here that we're letting go to seed. We've got the chives here that we're letting go to seed. This is the wild rocket, which we're going to, it's a perennial, this one, so we can actually divide it through cuttings. We're putting that in salads, but we can also grow it from seed as well. It'll produce a few seeds. This one here, now this one is a type of, I think this one might be called vivid choy. It's a type of pak choy. You can see the seed pods are quite big on that. They'll be ready in 1 or 2 weeks for seeds. And then in the back corner here we've got a big load of poppy seed. This is all going to flower in the next week or two. And then we'll have loads of poppy seeds. So this is the transition time, and then we'll look at like what is going on in between this. So we've got in the corner of this we've put a new crop that we're experimenting with. This is called cucumber melon. It looks like a melon or a baby squash. You can see it's got this trailing habit. It likes the heat. It produces little cucumbers that are about the size of, like, you know, probably what do you call it? A small tomato, and they'll be they'll look like a melon. That's why it's called a cucumber melon. And then we've got basil here. We've got 3 basils gone in there. There's 3 more waiting to go in when the seeds come out. We've got lettuce again, regrowth from the winter, which we're still harvesting, but we are going to collect seeds off that. One way we mark the seeds is with a red rope to tell people not to pick it. And we've got a couple of tomatoes down there, hiding in amongst the plants. See here, tomatoes, another basil in there, more tomatoes and basil. Yeah. And then here we've got coriander, and next to this little patch here we've got a little square. We've got cucumbers. Now this type of cucumber is from Spain. It's called alcafoz cucumber. They get about this long, really big cucumbers, and they're a bit more crunchy they're less watery and more crunchy. We really like them. We cook them as well. Then on this side we've got leeks in the corner, which we've sown straight into the bed, and these leeks are for transplanting. So when they get to about pencil thickness, they're not far off now. We could transplant them at that stage there. But we're going to let them get a little bit bigger. Then we're going to pop them straight out into the vegetable beds, where I showed you where the onions were. They're going to go next to the onions. And then we'll start harvesting the leeks in about probably October, November, December would be the time to start with them. A little plant here, which is an interesting one. This one is Mexican coriander. It's a new one we're trialing called pipiche. There's another cucamelon there. And then we've got 6 cucumbers here. This is just the standard cucumber. This one will produce cucumbers about 6 inches long. A watery variety. We've got more of the Mexican coriander, the pipiche here, and we're intercropping, so we're making the most of the space by doing a diversity of plants.
So we're now in the forest garden. I mean, look at this place. Steve, what's a forest garden?
A forest garden is basically a garden made up of perennial plants, in a very simple way of looking at it. And in today's day and age, people are planting forest gardens with the intention of growing food and other useful crops from perennial plants.
And you got a big hand in this, of course.
Yeah, so perennials are basically plants that come back year after year. That's why they're called perennials. And the model of a forest garden is to try and design it around like a young woodland. And it's based around this idea of, if you take just a general look, at the general scene here, we've got trees, we've got shrubs, we've got low growing ground cover plants, we've got a whole variety of different shapes and sizes going on, and each one of these different plants is going to have a different layered root system underground. So that means that the general biomass that's produced in a forest garden from year to year outweighs that will be being produced in an annual system where all the plants are at the same level within the soil. So like a field of wheat or a field of carrots or whatever, you've got like a very shallow root system that's being, or a very small volume of the soil that's actually being utilised. So even though a forest garden system might not be as productive as like a monoculture or even just an organic system like the veg garden that we were doing, the advantage of it is that we don't need to dig it every year. We don't need to replant it every year. The trees, once you pop them in, will just come back year after year after year. And with a little bit of pruning, they pretty much look after themselves. And then we've got things like the raspberries, which, with a bit of mulching and weeding, they should eventually just start looking after themselves.
So this is a form of farming, living in harmony with nature?
Yeah, basically, if you think about ecological systems, there's the need for pollinators, for example. There's the need for insects to come in and pollinate the fruit, or there's the need for certain creatures to maybe create a prey-predator relationship within a system that keeps the system in balance. With a diversity of plants like this, with things that are, going to feed the bees and are going to create little ecosystems for the mice and the voles and maybe even the slugs and the frogs and the toads, they're all part of the whole system. And what we've found over the years is that when the ecology starts to suffer, when there's no places for the bees to live, or there's no places for the other animals to live, the whole ecosystem goes out of balance. And one of the main causes of that is the fact that humans have just created monocultures. and then they start having to spray extra chemicals on their crops of monocultures because there aren't the prey-predator relationships present. So that's a sign of a system that's gone out of balance with nature. What we're trying to do here is create a diverse system that creates those natural prey-predator relationships as much as possible, so that, you know, we can farm in a more natural way. We might not get all of our food from here, you know, we might need to plough a field and grow a load of other food because this isn't producing enough from the system. But the fact that we've created a space for all those other creatures to live in as well means that they can go and support our larger farming systems. And this is something that's necessary whether you're, you know, an organic farmer or a non-organic farmer. Even the non-organic farmers are still relying on the hedgerows for certain relationships to be present in their systems. And organic farming systems on a big scale leave what they call beetle banks for the beetles to live in, because they know that having these little strips which are uncultivated allows the creatures to come out and support their own ecosystems and keep things in balance.
When did all this begin?
This began in 2009 when we ran a permaculture course here. And on the back of the permaculture course, there was a grant from Environment Wales that was to experiment with growing, experimenting with different forms of food production within Wales. And we made a proposal to plant a forest garden because a lot of us were interested in forest garden systems back then. And the proposal was basically around 3 core elements of what a forest garden is. One is plants, another one is mushrooms, another one is bees. And there was a beekeeper living here at the time, there was a mycologist who was learning about mushrooms living here, and I was here, which I'm the plant person. So the combination of the three of us made us realise that there's this kind of relationship between bees, plants and mushrooms. Mushrooms are the things that break down the soil. They break down the organic matter into soil. And then the bees are the pollinators. And then the plants are the things that are giving food to the mushrooms and to the bees. So it kind of created this natural cycle, and we thought, let's put it all together as a forest garden system. And so we planted it up. You can see there's a walnut tree here. There's an alder tree here. This walnut tree is now probably 12 years old. We are picking walnuts off it. It's just starting to flower now. There's an alder tree here, and you might be asking yourself the question, well, what can you eat off this? This is a tree in the garden, not for food, but for nitrogen fixing, because there's some plants that do very special functions in the system. What this is doing is it's bringing down nitrogen and putting it in the soil around it, so it's feeding the other trees around it, like the walnut tree. Then on this side, you know, in this same system, I also decided to create a vegetable bed, which we can do. So we just dug up some of the grass and we planted squash in here. And I'm also going to put sweet corn in here, and I'm going to put some potatoes in. I've put the potatoes in already, actually. But this has just been improved with our own homemade compost. And then it's the seeds from our squash that we saved last year that we've also put in here. So this is our food bit here. This is a bit for nature. This is another food bit here of the walnut tree. And, you know, they can all kind of coexist together, you know, essentially. So yeah, that's basically where it came from. It's 1.5 acres of land that we've experimenting with, basically.
I mean, and visually it's so beautiful and so rich in wildlife. I mean, the chorus of birds that I'm hearing around here is just phenomenal. There's actual beehives here too.
Yeah, we've got an apiary of about 30 beehives, and there's a Welsh beekeeper called John who comes and manages the bees. He's been looking after bees for almost 50 years now, and he's very experienced with the bees, and it's a real blessing to have them here because we definitely have plenty of pollinators, and we do get honey from the hives, but generally we're following a predominantly natural beekeeping practice, which is, you know, only interfere with the hive if there's a need to interfere with the hive, only feed a hive if they don't have enough food to get them through the winter. If there's diseases in the bees, like the varroa mite, which a lot of people are talking about at the moment, we're actually allowing the disease to kill off the bees, so that we're creating a bee in this environment that will be naturally resistant to the diseases. So rather than going in and spraying with the various different chemical methods that you can use, and even organic methods you can use to actually kill off the varroa mite, we're actually allowing the bees to just evolve through that process.
Like herding bees, really.
Yeah, you know, bees, without beekeepers, we would be in a big trouble. We'd be in big trouble. Bees don't have places to live in the wild anymore, because mostly we've chopped down all our big trees that would go hollow, and the bees would live inside the trees. They would also live in the chimneys of houses, but then people don't have open fires anymore, or old abandoned chimneys, so there's no cavities for them to live in, essentially. So yeah, the other major reason for bees dying off is that agriculture has become a monoculture, and instead of there being a constant supply of food for the bees through wildflower meadows and small-scale farming systems, we've just got hundreds and hundreds of acres of wheat, which doesn't give any pollen for the bees, or we've got a huge field of oilseed rape, where the honey they get from it only comes at one time of the year, and then there's nothing left for them at the other time of the year. So there's like a spike in the pollen and nectar flow, and then a dearth, because there's no other flowers to create the continuation. What we have in this garden is things flowering constantly all year round. Yeah. And with the market garden next door, they're growing green manures like clover and phacelia, and we're growing buckwheat, and we're growing broad beans and field beans, and these were all expanding the kind of the food for the bees, just like we do for ourselves. We don't want to just have all the runner beans in September and then we get sick of eating them and have to freeze them. We want a little bit of food every day of the year, and that makes us survive. Just like with the bees, a little bit of flowering constantly throughout the year is what will keep them alive throughout the year without having to feed them or supplement them too much.
So between the growing and the trees and the bees, the mushrooms, you've created this ecosystem which is sustaining itself with your due care and attention and TLC.
Yeah, well, essentially we are part of that ecosystem, you know, and whether we like it or not, we are part of an ecosystem. It's just that most people have forgotten that, or they've become so far removed down the line of from producer to consumer that they've kind of forgotten or lost touch with it.
So much going on here. I mean, what's going on here?
What you've got here in this bed is grafted fruit trees. So you'll see there's a little bit of tape here on the tree, and then there's a sprout coming up from the bit of wood that's kind of a different type of tree to this. This bit lower down here is a rootstock. This is what's called a scion. It's basically a cutting from a variety of tree that we wanted to grow. Let's see what this particular variety is called. This is Beauty of Bath. So this is taken as a cutting from a tree down at the bottom of the garden, and as it grows we want to grow it up to like as tall as it can go in 1 year, and then this is a nursery bed, so all of these trees will become new varieties of trees which we can then either sell or plant out to create more orchards, essentially. I've got a lot of cider varieties here from a cider orchard from about 5 miles away, where the guy's been growing cider varieties, a lot of heritage Welsh cider varieties for 20 years, and I wanted to get cuttings off them. So I took the cuttings in beginning of March, grafted them onto these trees, and then we can create our own cider orchards. And so it's nice to experiment with. In total, in the whole of Coed, we've probably got about 130 varieties of apple. Wow. And over the next 5 years, I'll have quite a good understanding of which varieties are suited to this area. So people can then come to me, like maybe farmers who are, want to experiment with orchard growing and say, what's the best varieties of apple to grow? They might just be in the field next door. And the thing with apples is that they're quite location specific. If you get the wrong variety for your area, it will maybe get disease, it will maybe get blown over by the wind, it might not like the soil conditions. If you get the right variety, like so for example this apple tree here is one of the right varieties for this area. You can see it's a very big, strong, happy, healthy tree. It's covered in fruit for this year. We've had to prune it very little, there's no disease on it. This variety is called Bardsey, and it's from Bardsey Island, just off the coast of Wales. Other varieties have really struggled, like so another example would be this variety of apple here. It's not quite so suited. We've had to prune it heavily, we've had to regraft it higher up. This is a separate variety of apple here. This is a different graft point where we've done cleft grafting. So you can see it's literally just healed. I chopped it off here completely, stuck a new variety on because this variety was getting diseased, and you can see how much I've had to prune it to keep the disease off it. So this is what we're learning through doing forest gardening is, you know, what trees are going to be suited to producing food in a low effort way into the future.
I'm curious. I mean, never has there been a time where this is more relevant than now, that people are beginning to wake up, beginning to realise, beginning to consider the food. How would you see growing and the future and how we can draw from it? I mean, where do you think this is all going?
Well, I've often said that necessity is the mother of invention, and I kind of got almost a little bit despondent to, you know, some of the kind of need to try and convert or preach or change people's minds upon certain things, because I saw that it would take a bit of a crisis to actually really make it happen. You know, this way of life is not intellectual, although it can have an intellectual side to it. It is physical, and it is time consuming, and it is a commitment, and all those things make it difficult in the modern day and age. And it's taken this little virus, invisible threat, to kind of get people's minds back onto it. Maybe it's been lost for a generation and some people having to rediscover it, but we only have to go back to the Second World War when we were quite self-sufficient as a country, and we had the whole Dig for Victory movement, and there was like a huge push to grow as much as we could, and we saw the benefits from that, and we saw that heart disease dropped and the cancer rates dropped and people's health was generally better, and that the spirit of community was generally more alive. And we've kind of hit another time like that, and if we look at what the general, you know, understanding is of pandemics and viruses, this isn't the first, and it's certainly not the last, you know. So we're going to have more waves where people are actually going to be, to some degree, forced through necessity to go to things like this. And the recommendation would be to anticipate those changes and prepare in advance. You know, there's the old saying, the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. And you can see that with this garden, that now, you know, we're going to be producing a ton of apples in this garden, and then the next year, 1.5 tons, and then the next year, 2 tons, and then from year after year, we're going to have that resource that with practically no effort, we're just going to be able to keep coming back and relying on that and having a certain sense of security from that. Really, on a kind of a national level and a global level, we should be forcing governments to invest in this sector on a huge scale, like not just throwing a bit of lottery funding money at it or throwing a few £1 million to create a new project. We need to see the entire country going towards this shift, with it being part of the national curriculum, it being opening up new allotment sites in cities, getting the smallholding people empowered to being allowed to slaughter their own animals again, save their own seeds, and being allowed freely to being trusted to, you know, hold a standard at that and actually be leading lights and guides to
even farmers who are so far removed from the system, just being tenants or contractors for supermarkets, rather than actually having some control over what they're producing and being allowed to eat it themselves, for example.
There's so much to learn, so much information. It's been a real pleasure. It's a real pleasure to be here at this current time. Steve, thank you very much for sharing with us.
You're welcome. Happy growing.
Happy growing, yes.